Greetings. Welcome to On Becoming a Healer. In each episode of this podcast, we ask about how doctors and other clinicians develop helpful and rewarding relationships with the people we aim to serve. But what we can offer patients and their communities depends in part on who gets into the profession of medicine. There is a renewed interest in programs that try to help people who want to become doctors have a chance to do that, even if they didn't start with quite so many advantages as I did. I'm going to be speaking with two people who are seeking to become doctors and one physician working with the I Am Able Foundation, a pipeline program focused on Black students in the Chicago area. So I just want to say welcome to all of you and offer brief introductions. First up, Dr. Sosa Aiwerioghene is a physician who was born in Nigeria, and he came to the U.S. at age 16. Recently graduated from Loyola's School of Medicine with a match in anesthesia, and he is a mentor in the I Am Able program at this time. Hello, Sosa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Korinne Carr is a native to the west side of Chicago. She went to Xavier University in Louisiana and HBCU, and then became a science teacher in Chicago's public schools. She has two boys. And after teaching for a while, she decided to pursue medicine, and she is in the I Am Able program and applying to medical schools. Hello, Korinne.
Hello.
Josh Leake is the son of a minister, now a bishop, who went to Northern Illinois University, and he's also a medical assistant. He's pursuing a post-bac series of studies at Chicago State, and he's applying to medical school. Hello, Josh.
Hello. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, and finally, my co-host, as people know, is Saul Weiner. Hi, Saul.
Hi, Stefan.
So at this point, I'd like to ask Saul to tell us why this topic is one that we are really interested in and how you came to invite these three guests.
Sure. So first of all, I want to remind listeners of an episode that we did quite a long time ago in October of 2020 with Dr. Lamenta Conway. Lamenta is a physician in Chicago who founded the I Am Able Foundation. She and I have been close colleagues and friends for 20 years. And in that two-part series, we featured her life and the challenges that she experienced as a Black woman getting into the medical profession, coming from a community in Chicago where getting into medicine is very uncommon. And there are so many hurdles to overcome, particularly in the context of systemic racism. And then in the second episode, she talked about why she founded I Am Able in order to create a pipeline program for many others. And so I just want to recommend that as a starting point for listeners. So I thought that it would be wonderful to reach out to Lamenta and identify several of the participants in the I Am Able Foundation so that we could hear directly from them about their experiences. Now, I think that many listeners are aware that there is a tremendous underrepresentation of Black physicians in the United States. And there's also a fair amount of research showing that for Black patients, having a Black physician can make a significant difference. And some of you may be quite familiar with the work that's been done looking at a number of aspects of the effect of not having enough Black physicians on the care of Black patients and on their experiences. But I think I want to start by saying that even if that weren't the case, even if there were no evidence that Black patients would benefit from more Black physicians, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a fundamental injustice in our own profession when we look at the actual numbers. So, for instance, in 1978, Black men accounted for 3.1% of the national medical student body, and now the number has fallen to 2.9%, and that's actually from 2019, from when we have available data. So, unfortunately, we've actually lost ground. With Black women, the numbers are not much better. In 1978, 3.6% of medical students were Black women, and now the number is 4.4%. Now, again, these numbers are really discouraging when you think about the fact that Blacks in America represent about 13% of the population. So I think we really have to start by saying that, if we as a profession believe in justice, this is something we should be concerned about. These numbers are 3 or 4-fold below what they should be if this population were represented equitably in our profession. And so, we felt this was a good opportunity to talk with young people who are going through this process of trying to enter the profession, one of whom has successfully entered the profession and is just about to start residency, but it's been playing an important role in mentoring. and then 2 others who are also working on getting into the profession. When I talked to Lamenta, we thought we'd pick individuals who kind of represent different aspects of this challenge. So, of course, Sosa has gotten to the point where he is about to embark on the profession of medicine as a resident. And then we have Korinne, who, of course, is a Black woman trying to get into the profession, well on her way, has been, as you heard, applying to medical school. And then Josh, who, of course, is a Black man who is also working on the journey into medicine as well. So we've kind of got a representative picture here. The other thing I'll say before we get started is that Sosa comes from a Nigerian background. He actually, as you heard, came to the United States at the age of 16. And that, I think, creates quite a different context. And I think we'll be interested in getting Sosa's perspective on that. I think it's quite different to enter a kind of racist society when you've already had 16 years in an environment where you haven't had to deal with some of those struggles compared to basically growing up in that environment. And it'll be really interesting to compare and contrast the perspective of Sosa compared to Josh and Korinne. So without further ado, I want to turn it over now to Stefan and just tell you how much I'm looking forward to having this conversation and getting to hear firsthand from them about the challenges and rewards of this really difficult journey.
Okay. Yeah. No, thanks a lot. I'd like to start, if possible, with Korinne. And we have one question we're going to try to ask all 3 of you, or actually a couple of them for all 3. This question has a premise to it, which you may or may not agree with it. So just listen carefully. And if you think the question itself is a problem, just tell us. But here's how we might say it. Korinne, in a just world, we might say that skin color really shouldn't matter at all. Maybe no one would care or really notice skin color more than, say, a person's eye color. That's not the case in the United States. When did you become aware that your skin color would be a factor in your life? When in your life did that emerge?
Thank you for asking that. I went to a high school where I was the minority, and I was around Black kids, white kids, kids of multiple races, so that was normal to me. But when I went to college, I went to an HBCU, and learning more about other people's stories and backgrounds kind of made me realize that there were other people out there that looked like me, but were really different from me. In high school, I also don't feel like I was given a lot of direction, but none of my advisors pushed me toward Xavier or any other school, knowing that I was looking to be a doctor. Most of my push came from my family, and they didn't know. The reason I went to Xavier was because my parents heard a Tom Joyner morning show, and he was talking about the top schools to go to if you're interested in becoming a doctor. And they heard that and told me, and it just so happened to be when I was applying to colleges. And so I'm like, oh, okay, this is where I'm going. But it was totally different being around mostly all Black kids. Being at Xavier, there were kids looking like me that were smarter than me. It really kind of made me push myself. So I did notice that it made a difference when I was just, I guess, more surrounded around students that looked like me all the time.
That's fascinating. And I think that a lot of people, maybe a lot of white people, actually think that they imagine that a Black person's first experience is they're Black and they're suddenly around whites. And they think, oh, this is going to make a difference. But you're actually saying the opposite, which is your view and your perspective changed radically about what the skin color might mean once you were in a mostly Black environment like Xavier University.
That's right, Stefan. Even being at Xavier, some girls were darker, some girls were lighter. And you get treated differently just because of that as well. I was considered one of the light-skinned ones. So, people do look at you differently in that way. And you try to my goal as a person is just try to be a good person. So I know that color makes a difference. I'm not naive, but I do try to just treat people with kindness and respect and be a good person.
I'd like to shift this question to someone with an entirely different background, which would be Sosa, who, was born and raised mostly in Nigeria. And Sosa, I'm wondering when, if at all, you thought of skin color as potentially being a factor in your life, if there's something that brought that to light in your mind.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Stefan. I think this is an especially very important question to ask. So of course, I was born and raised in Nigeria. I moved when I was 16. And of course, Nigeria is a country where, for the most part, everyone looked the same. We might have different faces, but in terms of skin color, we absolutely looked the same. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Color wasn't even part of anyone's conversation. It was just non-existent at the time. So when I moved to the United States, I was 16. It's very interesting when I started college. Actually, I have a story. When I started college around 2012, I remember distinctively one fateful evening. I was walking home, and at the time, I think I had a hoodie on, one of those hoodie things in the fall season, I think. And I was just walking home, no issues. And I remember one of my mentors, she screamed my name. She screamed Sosa, and I was like, hold on. Don't be screaming my name like that in the evening. And then she ran up to me. She's like, Sosa, do not have your hoodie on. And I quote, it's not safe for you. This was in New York City at the time. This is the Bronx. This is the evening, and you're a big black man. You cannot have a hoodie on. You could get hurt. And I was taken aback. I was like, what are you talking about?
Holy shit.
What are you talking about? So, it was around that time that Trayvon Martin was just unfortunately killed. So I started to realize that this is actually a thing. Okay. Like, I can't just be walking around willy nilly without paying attention to my environment, just because of the color of my skin. So I would say, yes, it was around 16, 17, 18. That's when I started to realize that I am different. I'm different from the person next to me. And it's
a context change. It's a change of context that forced you to suddenly see yourself in a different way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with being different, but it's unfortunate that we have to have this conversation where different is scary.
Right. I mean, I have felt very different when I worked in Africa, but I was different in a way that was actually, odd, but privileged. I was a physician visiting, and, I was a fish out of water. I mean, people could see me. I could see myself not fitting in exactly, but it didn't represent a significant threat to my well-being.
Yeah.
So I think you've got a very different trip there, and suddenly popping up in New York with a hoodie on.
Yeah. But I would say this though. This is one of the reasons I really I love New York City. It's one of the most diverse places in the world. So of course, we have people from Nigeria, Africa, South America, everywhere. You kind of find your community in a place like New York City. So I would give New York that.
Some props.
Yeah.
And I guess, Josh, we haven't asked you, but I'd like to ask that same basic question, which is when, if ever, did you become aware that your skin color would be a factor in your life?
So for me, the experience was a little different from Korinne and Sosa. So growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, you kind of start out assimilated into what was the culture there. So pretty much you get used to walking into restaurants and being the only black family, and everybody's looking at you because you don't look like them. The racism aspect wouldn't really kick in until I moved to Chicago. And that was where, I found myself kind of the reverse effect of Sosa and Korinne. And it was like, oh, like, you're black. Like, these are the things you were taught in Tennessee not to do. And these are the things that we do here that you're allowed to do. So I found myself around a group of people that were very liberated. And I was literally in shackles this whole time, which was a process that I had to unlearn. And it would take me another 10 years, just 10 years and therapy to unlearn it. So.
Could you give one example of a behavior that you were potentially taught not to do in Tennessee? Bear in mind, I live in Alabama, but something you were taught not to do that then you could do in Chicago.
I think just like speaking up for yourself in general. It's very frowned upon. I mean, and Sosa touched on it, like being a black man, a lot of people find you intimidating for whatever reason. So I had built a great skill. I am very great at disarming people, but it comes at a great cost, right? Like people will tell me all the time, like, you have such a calm demeanor. Well, I have to be that way, right? I can't be expressive. Otherwise, you may be afraid of me and everything that comes with me. But pretty much, I pretty much had to learn how to speak up for myself. And, my wife was one of those people who helped teach me how to speak up for myself properly and tell people what it is that I'm feeling in an appropriate manner that wasn't threatening to them.
Wow. Yeah. Being told you're so reassuring and calming when the backstory is because I was expecting to be threatened by you kind of doesn't sound so nice.
Exactly.
We're going to turn to the next question, which I'd love to again direct to Korinne, which is when did you start thinking about becoming a doctor? I think I heard you say Xavier University was partly a target because you were thinking about becoming a doctor.
I think about this question all the time because I don't know if there's like a moment where I said I'm going to be a doctor, but I do remember, I guess my earliest thing that I can remember is in 4th grade, we talked about careers, and that was the one that stuck out to me the most. But I didn't know that it would be an option until my parents changed our doctor. And we went from having a white male doctor as our family doctor, and I started going to a Black woman pediatrician. And I think my parents really wanted to take us to Black professionals for things that we needed to do when we were younger, just so that we can see possibilities, that there are people out there, and to support the community. But at the same time, science was always my jam. Like in school, it was my favorite class, as well as math. And of some of the professions that I've just been introduced to, even in college, just becoming a doctor seemed the best for me because I really do like talking to people, learning about their stories, just hearing what others have to offer and seeing how I can be of help.
Yeah, I think seeing somebody makes a big old difference. Sosa, when did you start thinking about becoming a doctor? What got that in your mind?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm so glad that I'm on this call, especially being an immigrant. So I'm bringing that immigrant perspective. If you're not aware, there's this old thing, or I guess like a stereotype, where immigrant parents normally encourage. I don't want to use the word push. They encourage their kids to either go into medicine, engineering, or law. My parents were kind of similar. In high school, I remember them just saying, "So you're going to be a doctor and nothing else." And I'm like, hold on, no. I like the sciences, but you're not going to tell me when I'm going to be, okay, so chill. So at the time when I started college, I loved the sciences, and I was actually working on going into graduate school and getting a PhD. I was working in this lab in college. I loved it, but I didn't feel fulfilled. I didn't feel like I was doing what I wanted to do. Around junior/senior year of college, I just started self-reflecting, and I was like, what is my purpose in life? What can I really do? And I started exploring other options. And I stumbled upon a program much like the Aiwerioghene Foundation in New York called Mentoring in Medicine. Again, this is just to emphasize the importance of programs like the Aiwerioghene Foundation. But anyways, I contacted a couple of physicians. I was able to shadow them or work with them in some projects. And I realized that my purpose in life is to serve. And again, we can serve in, different aspects and stuff, but I wanted to serve my community through healthcare. I wanted to serve by bridging the medical gap between the communities and, obviously healthcare. So it was around then I found my purpose, and I don't see myself, or I couldn't see myself doing any other thing from then.
What I hear there is that serve my community could mean serving Black people in the U.S. or maybe elsewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, your community doesn't necessarily have to be, for me, Black people, right? Community is just the people you kind of identify with. But in this case, yes, it would be serving the underserved, serving minorities, serving the Black people who desperately need people who look like them to serve them.
I, too, was pushed. I'm the child of 2 immigrants, and I did have a number of, I would say, strong advantages from them. But when I laid out my potential choices near the end of college, they pretty heavily leaned on medicine as the most secure pathway, which was okay for me as it turned out, but could have been a tough form of pressure.
And I should emphasize, again, when my parents were pushing me to go into this field, I kind of rebelled against that. I didn't want that. But I was able to find myself going back to this profession because that's what I really wanted to do. So, I had my own, I would say, incentives for going into medicine rather than having my parents, push me into going into medicine.
Yeah. Josh, tell us about when you first thought about becoming a doctor, and were there any role models involved or people who guided you toward that?
So my parents played a large role in my decision. I didn't per se have an exact role model of, this is what a doctor should look like. But I suppose a lot of the pastoral work that my father did in the church was very similar to I found a lot of similarities between what he was doing and what doctors had to do. He was getting up 3:00 in the morning to go see some of the members that were on their deathbeds, going to read them something to make sure that their soul was in check before they saw God. So I was seeing things like this. I was seeing the way that he was managing people and having to manage himself and a lot of the emotions that came with it. And I suppose that played a large influence on my decision. But like Sosa, I fought this for a long time. My parents always told me, you're going to be a doctor, right? I was like, no, there's no way. And my thing was, I was like, no, I'm going to the NBA. I just knew I was going to the NBA. Typical, right? And if it wasn't that, it was an FBI agent. If it wasn't that, it was a fighter pilot. But I'm not going to become a doctor. That's not for me. I had 2 falls in middle school, and I ended up with a knee issue that was not going away. It literally took my athletic ability away. I wasn't able to jump. I wasn't able to run. I couldn't make cuts. And there was something wrong. And so I was telling everybody around me, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. Well, in the Black community, typically it's, throw some dirt on it, you'll be okay. Or there's nothing wrong with you, just push through it. So I was pushing through it, tough guy, right? High pain tolerance, you'll be okay. So I pushed through it. Things got worse. The doctor had me on, I believe it was a total of 900 milligrams of Aleve a day just to manage the inflammation. And I came up with the diagnosis before he even got to it. And that's how I ended up falling in love with medicine. From there, I ended up joining the athletic training program and was able to get a lot of hands-on experience. I decided that role wasn't enough for me as far as patient care, went. And the rest is pretty much history. I mean, I didn't really know I wanted to be a doctor until I started shadowing Dr. Ike through the I Am Able program, who was a cardiologist out of Northwestern.
I guess for point of reference, I have to ask, and maybe it won't be important, but was Dr. Ike Black?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There was one thing he said to me, nobody else had said to me. It was, you can do it, you just don't know you can do it yet. And those words literally changed my attitude moving forward to this day.
Yeah, so suddenly this thing that was your parents were pressing, but was to your mind out of reach, began to seem like it was in reach. Did I hear you right there?
Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about being generations behind, it literally felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean and I had all this pressure on me to perform.
A lot of it coming from your parents, right?
Yeah, a lot of it coming from the parents. I mean, especially coming out of a PK, a pastoral household, there's a lot of expectations there.
Yeah.
Not only, education-wise, but from a social perspective as well.
And do you think they didn't quite realize that you were in some ways behind?
No, I don't think so. I mean, even just the transition from Tennessee to Illinois, I mean, the education system in Tennessee is behind. And then you come to Illinois with all these great education systems, and I end up in the Homewood Flossmoor district, which is phenomenal school system. I was behind, and I couldn't understand why I was struggling in these classes, and my parents couldn't either. We weren't aware that there was an education gap between Tennessee and Illinois.
Wow. The next question I wanted to ask, and maybe this is tricky, but it could apply to each of you, but I want to ask you, Josh, since we're on this, was there any point where you thought you needed help to hit key academic milestones to get into medical school? When was that, if it applies at all?
I was very stubborn in college. So there was that feeling of, yes, I need help. But there was also a pride aspect that I hadn't worked through. High school, I really needed it then. I just didn't know I needed it. I was under the impression that I should be able to keep up with everyone else. But I didn't understand that there were certain tools that I needed in my tool bag in order to succeed that other kids had already. So it became evident pretty early. And I ended up not getting help until 3 years ago when I reached out to the I Am Able program.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a missed opportunity. High school's not when we ask high schoolers to decide for themselves what help they need. It's when we ask adults to assess whether high schoolers need help. I'm hearing there might have been an assessment not done, an idea not entertained, something missed there among the adults.
My parents, their expectations of us were of pure heart. And so anything that was out of the ordinary, typically it was more so you're just not working hard enough. You need to work harder. You're being lazy. Not even thinking like, hey, like there's another alternative here. Maybe there is some help that's needed that we're missing.
Do you think you could say what that help is, or maybe one aspect? We all need all kinds of help. It's pretty diverse, the types of help we require. But is there one element you think that now stands out to you as one element of help that mattered a lot once you got it?
One-on-one, a lot of one-on-ones help with me. Just being able to sit down with either a tutor or a teacher, and just hash out the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
Just a time where I can just ask any and all questions, no matter how on point or off the wall they may be, just to silence a lot of the background noise that I have when it comes to actually trusting a particular answer.
I could totally relate. Let me ask Korinne, was there a point for you when you thought, I'm going to need help to hit academic milestones? When was that? Did it come at the right time, I guess?
So I believe that I am still learning how to ask for help. Most of my life, I was the youngest of 3 sisters, 3 girls. And I guess in saying that, I felt pride because I was the first one to graduate from college. And so I think that my older sisters in some way looked up to me. So I didn't know how to go and ask for help. I was the help, So knowing that I wanted to become a doctor, when I graduated from college, I took the MCAT, the old MCAT. There is an updated version since 2015. So I took the old MCAT and I did not score competitively at all. And it really shocked me because I think I'm so smart, but everything in school came somewhat easy if I enjoyed it. And so I'm thinking that when I take the MCAT, it's going to be super simple. I can do this. And it kicked my butt. I believe what would have helped me most is if I had mentorship and the resources that were available to me, I didn't know how to use them. And so I didn't know how to ask for help. Maybe should I take the MCAT again? It was like, I need money now. I'm grown, 20, 22, or however old at that age. I need to make some money and help out. Either help out if I'm going to live at home or take care of myself. And so that's when I started substitute teaching and got into really started enjoying teaching. And, I think about, should I have asked for help or could I have asked for help? I'm really trying to just take this whole life thing in stride and learn from areas where I was weak and try to get better and grow as an individual. So when I started to consider changing careers, from teaching to medicine, it was a whole thing because I would have had to quit my job, which ultimately I did. But that's a big decision to make when you have a husband and 2 children who are young. And so I decided to wait 2 years before I resigned. I made the decision 2 years before I quit. And we really tried to plan everything and see what it is that I might need to move forward. And so I found the post-bac program that I ultimately went to at Dominican, and we decided that that would be the best thing for me to stay local and go to school. And from there, I said, you know what, I'm going to reach out more now than I did in undergrad to my professors. Try to have more of a relationship with them and see if that helps me to kind of move forward. And in that, I ended up having a really good relationship with them. But some of the students there as well hooked me up with I Am Able. And it just so happened that Dr. Sweetie Conway's story is so similar to mine that she was married. She was an older student. She had 3 young children when she first started medical school. If that didn't sound like me, I didn't know what did. And so I'm like, all right, this lady, she did it. And so, I have a really great relationship with Dr. Conway. And I also have additional mentors just from being a part of this program. And that's the help that I need. Seeing someone who's in it and doing it, and then building a relationship with them so that you can learn from their mistakes and do a good job and keep my focus on that and giving back to the community.
And I would just emphasize, at least speaking for my own life, that there's every phase of my life has involved key adults, often older than me, now sometimes younger than me, who are guiding me through difficult things or through decisions that I can't make or through the problems that result from who I am that I can get around if they give me an advice on the way through it. Sosa, you come from a different situation here. Do you want to tell us, did you feel you hit any kind of key academic milestone challenges for med school?
Well, absolutely. I will start. I think I actually started from day one when when I started college. I remember the very first examination that I had in college. I think it was a calculus exam, and I remember scoring 59 out of 100. Now, in Nigeria, that is a passing score. Now, when I scored that 59, I was so happy. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm doing great. This is gonna be smooth." And then my friend at the time, took me to the corner and was like, "Hey, Sosa, you just failed." I was like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "Yeah, you need to get your stuff together because you just failed." So, it was around that time, I knew I had to change my study habits and make things work and, just, tap into the resources that I had around. Thankfully, in college was a little bit on the smoother side. However, though, the process of applying to medical school was a whole different story. And Korinne had touched on this earlier. The standardized tests, the MCATs, that was terrible. And I don't know about a lot of other students, but I struggled with it. I took the exam twice, and even then I was still not comfortable or confident about, getting to medical school with the scores that I had. But thankfully, again, the other aspects of my applications were stellar. But I really did struggle with standardized tests. Thankfully, of course, with mentors, people who just support you and kind of understand where you're coming from, understand your background, and then can tap into, your weaknesses and try to bring you up. Just like Joshua said earlier, we can achieve anything that we put our mind to achieve, but sometimes we just don't know it yet. And it's inspirational conversations like that actually brought me to this position that I am in now.
The mentors, were they sometimes not in medicine? Were they usually in medicine?
Actually, they were from all over. I had mentors. I remember Dr. Anthony Watkins, who now is a transplant surgeon in New York City. He was one of my mentors. He really took me under his wing, guided me through the entire process. My mentor from the lab that I was working in college, Dr. Stark, she was amazing. She supported me throughout the way. We should always be, open to always reach out to people again, make those connections from those relationships and get out of your box, like your box. It's just reach out to people and tap into those resources.
For those of you who have listened to some of the earlier episodes, one of the things I've talked about in the past about myself is that I have a learning disability. And so for me, getting into medicine was especially challenging. And I had to really develop a lot of coping strategies to deal with some of the frustrations and challenges. And I want to kind of ask you all about how you cope emotionally with the challenges, the failures, the setbacks on your journey into medicine. Sort of, how do you keep up your self-esteem? Are you someone who looks inwards? Do you look outwards? And what's been most helpful to you?
Thank you for asking me this. This is something that I'm continually working on. So one thing that I do now, I do go to church. I am spiritual. I'm a Christian, and I've been going to church all my life. So that part is somewhat ingrained in me. But at the same time, I have doubts and fears and, lose my faith even in myself sometimes. It's like I listen to music. That really helps me because I sing. I sing in my church choir, and I sing with my husband, and I sing in the shower and wherever else I get a chance. So music helps me to cope. Gospel, R&B, rap, whatever. I also talk to people, my mentors. I talk to my family who are not in medicine at all. And I talk to them just to clear my mind of the medical stuff and just let me hear about your day. I talk to my children. They are weird, just like their mom and dad, but they keep me up to date on new stuff. What's happening with 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds nowadays, YouTube, Sonic the Hedgehog, stuff like that. So I guess my coping comes from keeping my family close and not totally keeping my mind on medicine 24/7.
And Josh, how would you compare your approach to what you just heard?
I'm very similar in the sense that I have my support system that I utilize whenever my initial fail-safes have failed me. So I'm more so, I turn inward just because I just feel as though if I can deal with it inside, we're good. Nobody else needs to know what's going on. But, I turn inward until, inward doesn't work anymore. And then we turn outward. But I found that a lot of my frustrations I've been able to work out through some of the sports that I play. Like, for example, I'm a very avid golfer. And so those who know anything about golf understand just how frustrating and challenging it can be. But there's a lot of life lessons that are involved in it as well. And I've learned so much about myself through that. And one of the things that it's really helped me do is practice emotionally regulating, which has been huge in helping me get over a lot of the frustrations that I have. One of the most recent examples I have of it was, or the outward aspect at least, was we were in class. This was a biochem class, and we were given some information. And so we started to learn it, and I was working through the information in the packet, and I was getting frustrated. And I'm like, I don't understand why it's taking me so long to do this. And one of my good friends, Sam, turned to me and said, I don't understand why you're frustrated. And I looked at him, I was like, what do you mean? It's like, you just got the packet 30 minutes ago. How are you expecting yourself to learn this so quickly? And from there, it dawned on me that I had these unrealistic expectations placed on myself. And the emotional regulation work continued from there.
That's a great story. I can definitely identify with that. I can see the same thing happening to me. Sosa, how about you?
Yeah, no, I think my mind is very similar to Josh's, to be honest. I do a lot of self-reflecting though. And I think that, just, looking through my experiences and how I could have worked around those different situations has really helped me. But I also practice a lot of meditation as well. And I go to the gym. I work out way too much than I really should. But those are kind of like my, what helps me kind of navigate more difficult situations. And then when I think about my failures and stuff, I do a lot of self-reflecting.
So I think a natural kind of follow-up question is, what would make your training experiences or your studying experiences better, both as a person of color and also just in general? Obviously, since the focus of this podcast episode is on the challenge of taking this journey into medicine, as someone who is Black, I think our listeners would be particularly interested. Sort of imagine also that some of our listeners may be others who are interested in working with the iMabel Foundation or other pipeline programs. What do you think would make the training experience and the journey into medicine better for you if you could kind of think all the way back to when you first decided you were interested in medicine, kind of looking forward, what would have been most helpful for you?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of reflection on this piece, and I struggled greatly in school, as we discussed earlier. But I think if I had to go back and do it all again, one of the key things that I would do differently, I would definitely be much more interactive and present with my classmates and the teacher. I think as a Black man, it's so easy for us to get just caught in the wave of everything. And it's very easy for us to fall to the back of the class. And it's a gradual progression. You know, you start out in the front, then you go to the middle, then you go to the back. Next thing you know, you're out of the class. I went through it through many classes and I just wasn't engaged. So I think one of the things that I would definitely do is be much more engaged with my peers and my professors.
I just want to comment on how important a suggestion I think that is. I was one of those people who did actually go to the teaching assistant or the professor all the time. I probably drove them crazy. When I didn't understand something, which actually was a lot of the time, if not most of the time, I'm thinking way back to when I took chemistry, for instance, and I just couldn't follow a darn thing. I was one of those people who was basically knocking on the door of the professor every day, just saying, help, help, help. And I think what you're saying is maybe something about the culture in which you were in was sending you some kind of message that you should just kind of maybe not do that and kind of drift to the back of the class. And that was maybe compounding the problem. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Absolutely. So there was definitely a compound effect, right? So you've got a kid coming from Tennessee where it's frowned upon to speak up for, what you have going on. Like you deal with it. I mean, you roll your sleeves up and you just deal with it. But it wasn't helping here, right? Nobody was reaching out to see, like, was there anything that they could do to help? I mean, it was on you. Nobody was coming to save me. And I had to get to a point where I decided that I was going to be my own best advocate in this moment and actually say, like, hey, I need help. I'm not understanding this. Like, I think you're doing a phenomenal job teaching this, but it's not helping me in this way. So, yeah, it was definitely a compound effect, like if I'm not engaged, I can't interact with the material like I should be, like everyone else is. And so now, like, I'm playing catch up and I want to get an A, but I don't have a study habits going on. And it was just a compounding effect into basically oblivion. It didn't typically yield a great result.
So Josh, you earlier, this is really interesting because, it kind of fits with something you said very early on in the conversations, which is you talked about how in Knoxville, you kind of learned that as a young Black boy at that time, you weren't yet a man, that you were basically supposed to be kind of passive and be very careful not to speak up too much and so forth. And you talked about how hard it was to unlearn that when you came to Chicago and how you had to unlearn that. And I'm just kind of wondering if that was part of the piece here, that like it was part of this message that you should be on the kind of reserved side, the passive side, and maybe that was part of the issue. Is that what you're getting at?
That was part of the issue. The other part of the issue was the expectations I had placed on myself. When I was middle school, high school, I didn't have to study. I could just sit there in class and pick up everything that I needed to, and I would think that that was all that was needed. And so I started off college trying to do the same thing. Nobody talked to me about study habits, study technique. It was the teacher gave you assignments. You did the assignments. If you did the assignments, you got a great grade. But in college, it's much different. There are much more intellectual questions that needed to be that are asked that you are only able to answer if you interact with the material in a certain way. And that is a skill that I wouldn't learn until maybe my junior year college, which at that point, I'm just putting it into practice and I'm not exactly a master at utilizing those study techniques.
Yeah, I am. I'm thinking about that. It's late in the game when it's junior year, if you're about to take the MCAT.
Exactly. So very late in the game. And so I ended up deciding not to take the MCAT, right? I said, I've got a lot of weak points. My GPA doesn't look great. Mm-hmm. And I just need time to get this sorted out. Well, I would become even more exposed to myself and kind of like the inner workings of me through the MCAT. I mean, the MCAT was such a huge pivotal point for me. And shortly after I would take it, I would find I am able, which was literally perfect timing, because had I continued to try to do this on my own, I don't think I would be sitting here speaking to you right now.
Right.
I don't even know if I would be continuing to pursue medicine, just because I wasn't sure if I could do it. This test was literally defining who I was within medicine before I was even in it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it says something about whether you're ready for medicine, whether you're okay for medicine, whether you're going to get into medicine. It has both an instrumental role and it's also a symbolic role. It's doing both at once at that moment. And I think that gives it extraordinary psychological weight, regardless of whether you think that's a useful way to figure out who should become a doctor. It's going to have extraordinary weight.
Absolutely. And I think, kind of the biggest thing with that was just managing your own expectations about what defines you and just understanding who you really are. Right? Like, this is one test, but it doesn't determine how good of a person that you are. It doesn't determine how, great of a husband you are. It doesn't determine how great of a friend you are, how compassionate you are. There's a lot of parts of you that it doesn't read. And it's only one aspect. And it doesn't even tell you that, it doesn't tell you how smart you are, right? It tells you how well you can take a test. And I've never been a great test taker, which is, one of the things that we work to overcome as well.
And honestly, just to touch on that, Josh. So medicine, I guess the world of medicine is more so on, it kind of breeds a competitive environment. And I feel like that shouldn't be the case, right? It should be more of a collaborative environment. So you bring up the MCATs. It's similar with the STEP exams. Like in medical school, you take board exams, step 1, step 2, step 3. And now they're moving into turning the step 1 into like a pass-fail kind of situation, where students don't feel like they need to get a certain score to be very competitive, to apply to more competitive specialties. You just need to pass the exam and then move on. Because like you said, this standardized test doesn't really tell, if you're going to be a great physician, how you're going to interact with your patients. It doesn't tell you none of that. Right? It only breeds anxiety, and that's not great for student learners.
So taking all of this into account, we started out this conversation by talking about the extraordinary underrepresentation of Black physicians in the United States, both men and women. And you all have kind of been on this journey. Some people refer to it as a pipeline, that pipeline through the educational process into medicine. And we often talk about it as being, quote, a leaky pipeline. There are many points along the way where people can drop off. It can happen. The dream of becoming a physician can disappear at so many points along that journey. It can disappear for psychological reasons, just because the stress is so great. It can disappear because you don't have mentors to kind of set a path for you, or to inspire you, or to let you know something's possible. It can happen because you just haven't had an opportunity to build an academic foundation. There's so many possible contributing factors. From each of your perspectives, what is it going to take? What is it that is going to make that difference? I mean, I think being Black in America makes it extraordinarily challenging to be successful on the path into medicine, because there are so many impediments that we've been talking about. I think it's interesting that Sosa is on this call, is participating in this, because we kind of get the ability to compare and contrast. Sosa has come into this profession from basically a different journey. I mean, coming here at the age of 16 is quite different. We've talked a lot about intergenerational trauma for Blacks in America, what they've had, not just what you've had to experience, you, Korinne, and Josh, but what your parents had to experience, what your parents had to experience, and then the way in which that creates a number of psychological as well as structural challenges for you. And so just kind of when you look at your lives, I'm interested in getting your perspectives on what is it going to take for us to solve this problem so that Blacks in America are not at such a disadvantage. And I know this is a huge question, but I'm interested in your personal points of view as to what we need to do and what would likely be helpful.
So, first and foremost, I want to say, I think Black women and African women are killing the game right now. I think those numbers continue to go up for them. They're super motivated. They're taking advantage of the opportunities that they have. And you look at key players like Dr. Conway, and they're literally inspiring an entire generation, which is huge. I think when you look at the numbers, I think, and, Sosa, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's an even greater presence of African men in medicine than there is Black men. So I think that number shrinks even more when you look at it. From my perspective, medicine is very intimidating for a Black male. We're already playing catch up, and there's so much sacrifice that has to be had. When you're growing up, you have all these dreams of grandiose, and to pretty much go through a process that can potentially rip you to shreds and telling you, like, you don't hit these metrics, then you don't matter, right? That's the message that, is typically gotten from that. I think for me personally, one of the biggest things that could have happened was having more mentorship. Just having someone to pull you along and say, hey, you're coming with me. And just having the emotional and internal wherewithal to sustain everything that's being thrown at you. I mean, I've literally sat here and watched 3 guys that were going through the process with me and say, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. This is not for me. I'm going to go and take my talent somewhere that actually truly wants me to be around. So I think we just need more people like Dr. Ike to be around and say, hey, you belong here. You can do this. I'm part of your support system. And I think that's going to be the answer, is just having that support system, especially with programs like I Am Able.
Josh, that's just beautifully put. And all I can say listening to it is I hope you become one of those people for the next generation. I really, really do, just based on on your insight. I also just want to emphasize something you said earlier, which is, to get in, you have to jump through these crazy hoops. These multiple choice tests that you have to pass and do well on. I couldn't agree more. They, in my opinion, they have nothing to do with being a doctor, but you have to get through them, and it's really in some ways degrading, right? To have to do something that's that infuriating when it has so little to do with where you're trying to go. But that's just the way the system works. Man, I hope you stick with it and turn into that inspiration for the next generation. And I have a hunch you're going to do it.
I do believe that the MCAT and this medical school application process does have a certain character building aspect with it that is helpful in a sense, and in others it's horrible, right? But honestly, part of me is grateful for the exposure, and hopefully I can be of great use to people in my situation similarly, and those that are not so much in the situation. So thank you for that, because I definitely do want to make an impact in the long run that can possibly bring change.
Yeah, and you just said something else that I want to emphasize, because I think you're right, which is that to some degree what taking these tests does, and you talked about it as being character building, is it does kind of show that you can and you're willing to and you can do something just because it's been put in front of you. It's kind of like basic training as you go into the military. It's just like, you show that you can do it because you've been asked to do it and you have to do it. And there is some value in that. I agree. I think that's maybe a little bit about what you're getting at. So Sosa, why don't you maybe close out here and just tell us a little bit about your perspective on this question as well.
I couldn't even say it better than Josh. I share the same sentiment. I think that, first of all, being a Black person, we kind of, have this idea of either, like Josh said earlier, going into the NBA or, putting out a rap album, something in that realm. That's only because, for the most part, those are the professions we kind of see on a daily basis. So I have this notion where you cannot be something you do not see. So I think that mentorship, just like Josh said earlier, it's going to be the driving force in this predicament right now. We need more people like Dr. Ike. We need more people like Dr. Conway, who are in the forefront, who are in the TV, on the radio shows, being out there and just trying to motivate the next generation of physicians, and just telling students and telling Black people that they can do it. And again, there's nothing wrong with going to the NBA, and there's nothing wrong with being a musician and stuff, but we can be so much more academically. And I think that just having people like those are gonna be, or is gonna be, the answer. And for me especially, I don't think that I would be here without the support and mentorship I got from mentoring in medicine in New York City. That's why I am a part of the I Am Able Foundation. I'm trying to give back. I'm trying to, pay it forward in any way I can.
The words, "you're going with me" or "you're coming with me," are irreplaceable. Somebody has to say personally, not in generic terms, "you're with me, you're good enough to do this, I'm behind you." If it's not said personally, it doesn't count. And so sometimes these discussions get very abstract. Even the word mentorship sounds very abstract to me. But "you're coming with me" or "you're going forward, I'm behind you," these are very concrete. They either happen or they don't. We have to make sure that happens.
So just to continue off of what Stefan said, in that regard, like, I'm just very thankful for my support system being my parents, my wife, my friends, Dr. Ike, Dr. Conway, and Dr. Victoria Brander. These are all people that have just really been champions for me and had to look me in my eye and said, "Hey, you're coming with me. You're going with me. I'm behind you 1,000%.
Well, those are really on-target comments from each of you on this incredibly important journey. I'm so grateful, and I think I speak for both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode of On Becoming a Healer. If you have, and you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so now. Take care, everyone.